on YouTube is definitely no longer in the renaissance that it used to be back in the day. I mean, seriously, there was one point where on YouTube you just couldn't avoid horror content. It was just everywhere. Everyone was talking about it. There was whole channels dedicated to these horrific stories that were all over the internet. People were making their whole careers off of covering just these horrific stories that just blew up. There was a point where there was like a new horror story that would come out every month that would just blow up. Everyone would be talking about it. It was so huge that you just couldn't avoid it. Even offline, everyone was talking about it. I remember at school in that time, everyone was talking about this stuff. It was insane. It was like the big thing. Like, I remember when Mr. Nightmare and Some Ordinary Gamers were always on the front page and were breaking millions upon millions of views with each video because everyone was watching them. They were huge and they were massive at the time. Everyone knew what it was. It was just the big hit thing at the time. And it lasted for a while. Everyone knew about it. This was like a 4 or 5 year period. Everyone knew about this. It was huge and it just never went away for the longest time until overnight it felt like it just died completely. Hell, at one point, creepypastas were a cultural phenomenon that just couldn't be avoided whatsoever. And almost every major YouTuber at the time covered them in some form of way. Everyone was talking about it. It was the big thing. For example, horror content like SCPs and creepypastas were in everything. And I remember that kids were obsessing over these stories. It was huge. Like, everyone knows the stories of Jeff the Killer and Smile Dog, as they are just so deeply embedded in the cultural zeitgeist that you would have to be living underneath a rock to have never heard of them at least once. Like, that image from the Jeff the Killer creepypasta is just embedded in my brain. Everyone remembers it. It was such if you show that picture, everyone will know what that's from. It was just such a huge deal. But because of that, I need to ask, when was the last time you actually remember a new creepypasta or urban legend actually piercing into the internet culture more than those stories, especially recently? I mean, seriously, it's been a while. You can ask anyone and they'll know the Russian sleep experiment instantly. But if you ask them about the park ranger horror stories, then they'll have absolutely no idea what you're talking about. And yes, I know that story is popular, but it's just nowhere near on the same level as those channels and stories were. And the same happened to a lot of the horror YouTubers that covered these subjects. For example, Some Ordinary Gamers doesn't even make videos on horror stories anymore. He's moved completely onto commentary YouTube because the Storytime YouTube scene is almost dead. Creepypastas have nowhere near the same hold that they used to. That has like almost no control over the YouTube space except for a few rare exceptions. So have the stories just gotten worse, or is there something else that's going on with these stories that we just aren't talking about? Well, before we go any further with that, remember to like and subscribe, and if you like this video, let me know down below what you guys think about the video. And remember, I respond to every person that sends a message, at least I try to. If I don't have anything to say, I won't respond generally, but if I have something that I want to say, I will say it. So I will let you know what I thought about your comment, and I want you to let me know what you think. Please, seriously, let me know what you think of the video. I can take it. Now let's get on with the actual video. Creepypastas or internet urban legends have been on the internet since its very, very conception. It is something that has always been around. I remember it started off with the regular urban legends, but then it expanded onto new horror stories that were being created on the internet and shared around like crazy. It first started on places like chat forums where people would tell a story about something that happened to them, usually involving a Lovecraftian-like creature or a haunted game. And this would continue on with the actual horror stories like the creepypastas and the SCPs, but one of the earliest one that is talked about is of course Polybius, which would set a precedent on how a lot of these urban legends would be created. For example, Polybius tells the story of a game that is created by I think MK Ultra, if I remember right. That is a game that produces like psychoactive materials where it causes people to start hallucinating horrific imagery, and it causes people to essentially go insane the longer they play, eventually leading them to die, essentially. And it's controlled by the CIA, leading to this big conspiracy angle, and it just became a huge story when it came out. It became a part of the cultural zeitgeist. Everyone remembers Polybius. Polybius got so huge that it spread onto the actual main mainstream culture as it became a reference in The Simpsons, for example. Everyone knew what Polybius was, and that led to the creations of even more of these urban legends that became popular on the internet. And this led to more of these stories that would follow an urban legend-like format, which would eventually be known as creepypastas, where it would usually be the retelling of a haunted game or a lost episode or some weird eldritch abomination that they had to tell the whole world about, usually through a journal-like format in the story. And these stories would blow up in popularity, as the well-written ones had a generally good sense of realism and generally tried to stay in the realm of possibility, while the bad ones were also entertaining as they were so bad that they were hilarious. For example, everyone remembers just how funny Blood Whistle and Jeff the Killer were. These were stories that were so poorly written that they were entertaining. It usually was just so bad that the writing was so easy to laugh at. But with it came a lot of good ones, like the Russian Sleep Experiment and Mr. Widemouth are incredibly creepy stories. They would stick with you for years, and I still remember how those stories go. They are really, really well written. And it seemed like every month there would be this new, really, really well written story that would stick with you. And it was a great time to be around YouTube, especially because YouTubers were making their careers off of this. This was a huge thing. Everyone was talking about this. For example, you probably wouldn't even know who Mr. Nightmare or some ordinary gamers were if it wasn't for creepypastas. Same with Corpse Husband, he was huge from creepypastas. This was like a big deal. Everyone was doing narrations of these. And then another form of urban legend would pop up, one more focused on trying to stay more realistic than others with the creation of the No Sleep subreddit. No Sleep took itself much more seriously than creepypastas did, and a lot of the stories on r/NoSleep would be better written and focus a lot more on quality rather than quantity, although some stickers would get through. And these YouTubers were getting millions upon millions of views, and for some reason the internet became a perfect breeding ground for all of this. And remember, this is all before the explosion of mascot horror, so the horror of this was rather fresh and gave something for people to focus on. And I remember how popular these YouTube channels were at the time, as almost everyone I knew at the time were watching these channels because it was just the huge big deal at the time. Everyone wanted to hear about these stories, and the narrations were generally well written and well taken care of. And the people reading these generally had soothing voices to listen to. They were very interesting to listen to, as it seemed like they had a very good narrative voice. It was like reading an audiobook. So generally, what happened to all these channels? They all just seemed to disappear overnight. So what caused its slow demise over the years? Well, a lot of it I would say is because of a lack of interest in the subject over the years and the worsening quality of the stories over the years as well. As terrible as the stories could be at the time, they generally would have something that would make them iconic, such as covering iconic franchises or having truly, truly horrific pictures. As much as Jeff the Killer sucks, I will not deny that the image from the story is something out of my worst nightmares. Like seriously, that image is fucking horrifying. That image is more scary than anything in that story whatsoever. The story is dog shit, while that image will stick with you forever. It's such a creepy, creepy photo. I think the only reason Sonic.exe got big as it did, it was just because it was a thing on the Sonic franchise. Like literally, if it had not been on Sonic franchise, no one would have been talking about it. It was such a terrible story, but because it was covering such an iconic franchise and it was one of the first ones to cover that franchise, it blew up. It was massive, and once again, that image is iconic. Everyone knows the Sonic.exe image. It was a huge deal. It was a big part of the cultural zeitgeist once again. But you can only have so many stories focusing on the same 3 IPs before people begin to get tired of the stories. Like, you can't keep making horror stories on SpongeBob or Minecraft because those IPs have been done completely to death. And because of that, people begin to become bored of these stories, as the same stories keep popping up over and over again. But also the stories on No Sleep began to become more and more realistic, to the point that Creepypastas and No Sleep ended up becoming almost the same entities, with the stories on both becoming extremely similar. And because of that, a lot of big channels began to leave the story reading format and focusing more on other subjects. For example, Mr. Nightmare left creepypastas completely and started focusing more on realistic horror stories sent in by his viewers, while some ordinary gamers went and started focusing on becoming more of a drama YouTuber to great success. While ones who kept covering these subjects would notice their viewer rate lowering and lowering to the point of irrelevancy. So will creepypastas ever come back again? Now that creepypastas are essentially dead, mascot horror became the next big thing, like Five Nights at Freddy's, Bendy's, and Poppy Playtime. But there was some hope for creepypastas in the past few years. With the explosion of icebergs in the backrooms, creepypastas have hit a level of popularity that they haven't seen in years, and people are more nostalgic for creepypastas than ever. So we are seeing a new wave of people covering urban legends and creepypastas with channels like Wendigoon and other more popular YouTubers that are covering these icebergs. And while icebergs are starting to die down, a lot of channels are still covering these old creepypasta stories, and it's making them become more relevant once again, and it's good to see that this is happening all over again. We're seeing this new wave of YouTubers that are covering all these new stories. It's really fun, and it's good to see these stories are still staying in the cultural zeitgeist, but I'm hoping to see some more new ones start to pop up as well. And I'm glad to see that, because I remember growing up with these stories and just how much I liked them growing up. So let's see what the future holds for these stories. And I hope you guys all liked this video, and if you did, please let me know down below what you thought, remember? And I hope you guys like and subscribe, and I'll see you guys all next week, and I see you guys later.